This Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Wednesday, March 13th, 2019 day. This is the Millennial Roundtable of Point of View. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. We've got quite a show for you. We'll be talking about everything from the crackdown in colleges. The U.S. officials have brought charges against upwards of 50 individuals, in the largest case ever regarding the bribing of college officials in order to get their kids or to get children into college. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll also be talking about how some Republican college students don't feel safe on campus right now. And so it will be an interesting show, to say the very least, and so grateful that you have joining us for this show, but also ever more so, as always, grateful that we've got Chelsey Youman here of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm good today.
So good. So, it's Good Samaritan Day. I don't know if you know this or not, but today is Good Samaritan Day. And so I was really hoping that you were going to exercise Good Samaritan vibes and bring me something.
Stuff?
Yeah,
Okay.
but
I feel like that's a two-way street, Nick.
This is very true. This is very true. And so we'll just go push on this. But so grateful that Chelsea's here with us, and so she'll be joining us. And then we've got a couple of other guests that'll be joining us later on. We'll have Cole Feix will be joining us too here in the second part of the first hour. But nevertheless, let's just go ahead and jump into it, Chelsey, because I don't know about you, but growing up, one of the shows that I watched pretty religiously was Full House.
Absolutely.
That
was our generation.
I'm a guy that didn't want to cut it out with Uncle Joey, Have Mercy with Uncle Jesse. There was Bob Saget, who was Danny Tanner, and then you had Aunt Becky, and then you had the Olsen twins. And so, I am Full House to the very core.
Yeah, I was too. My sister and I are actually twins, so we were real into the Olsen twins and all that. Yeah.
And so I don't know about you, but was your world rocked yesterday when you heard news about this huge case that has just now broken open?
I'm very surprised by it. Yes, there's a whole scheme. It looks like a fraud scheme.
Okay, so to let our listeners in, if you haven't heard yet, Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin of Full House, Felicity Huffman of what is the show that Felicity Huffman was in? Felicity Huffman was in a show as well. Was among 50 that were indicted in the largest ever case alleging bribery to get kids into colleges. And so there was upwards of actresses Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin, and 9 college coaches are among the 50 people charged on Tuesday in what federal officials say is the largest ever college admissions bribery case prosecuted by the Justice Department. The Justice Department charged 33 affluent parents, which include CEOs and television stars, with taking part in an elaborate conspiracy that involved cheating on the SAT and ACT and parents paying coaches, quote, enormous sums to accept students who fabricated their athletic credentials at elite universities and colleges, anywhere from $500,000 to 2.5, and then in one instance it was $6 million. There was one individual named Bill McGlash. He's a prominent private equity investor. He was known as, quote, a leading proponent of how to invest ethically and for social impact. And so Lori Loughlin, who starred in Full House, will now be making her way to the big house. And that was my, I thought that was, no, it's not a good line. I thought that was a pretty good line. But this is shocking.
This is crazy.
Shocking, Chelsey. Shocking, Chelsey. And so here's what I thought was so interesting, though, because to a certain degree, there's a couple of ways that you can take this, and I'd be interested to hear what you would think. I think there's one way that you can take this, that this is just simply parents that are trying to live vicariously through their children. They're trying to their children's success is their success, so they're pushing their children to a great extent because they see their children as an identity of themselves. I think there's that, but then I think about like this is a pattern that they've shown And the research is very clear among cheating, among unethical behavior regarding children and students that are in the classroom today, that I do wonder, and again, I'm not saying that there's a causation here or correlation, but I do wonder, is the patterns that these children that we continue to see that's happening in the classroom regarding lack of ethic and lack of morals, rather, is that reflective of the larger parents, or is that simply just the students living into the patterns that their parents set before them? But nevertheless, there's just a lot to unpack here.
There's a lot to unpack. I had to read the article a couple times to really understand all the details, because supposedly none of the actual universities themselves are involved in the fraud scheme. Individual coaches or maybe admissions staff members are, and have all been terminated, by the way, from what I read. But it was a little bit interesting in the way that I think, especially from a legal perspective, how the scheme was brought about, because none of this was really a shoo-in. So there was a guy who led the scheme, and they would pay him to have get extra. They would pay people taking SATs and ACTs to get their kids extra time. They would pay him to set up certain things on their admissions. So some of the students, it's my understanding, some of the students didn't even know their parents were doing this.
No. Like, from what I understand, I've even heard some individuals say that most of the students didn't know their parents were doing this. So when they found out, some of these students were actually at the school. And so when they found out, imagine being the first time you hear about all of this, you're actually at the school that your parents have worked so hard to be able, your parents have worked behind the scenes to get you admission, and to find out you didn't get admission because of your efforts, but rather because of your parents' bribery. There was a couple of instances where I thought this was so shocking, and the students have to be in on this piece, where to know certain Ivy League schools as well as certain schools have like lacrosse teams. They have certain spots that are open, and what they would do, one of the ways that they would do this is they would coordinate with a coach. They would coordinate with some individual or official that was going to allow their students to be able to earn a spot on this team to get them access to the school. And so they would either Photoshop pictures of them playing lacrosse or water polo or something. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, like if I'm a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old about to go to school, like what is going on here? And then I think about, like, from a team standpoint, like, how do you not know, well, this person has never played lacrosse in their life. This person's never played water polo. What in the world?
Well, I don't think
they
actually ended up joining the team. So what happened is they would put it on their application that they were a star member of a soccer team or a really competitive, I think like a rowing team maybe out of California to get into USC. And they would pay the coach to tell the admissions office, I'm really heavily recruiting this student, allow them in. It lowers the bar for that student to come in as an athlete, and they would really never make the team. So it's really pervasive. I think the amount of people involved is what surprised me. There are 50 people indicted. And I can't remember how many millions are involved. But when you have the federal government looking into a fraud scheme, they don't mess around. So they have enough hard facts and evidence to really prove their case and prove the prosecution. So, when I looked at this, I thought, wow, fraud's really hard to prove, because you have to prove like who really lost out, and how would the university be able to prove harm, or who has the harm here? But I think that they've got enough after looking more into it. It's a lot. But to your point about whether students, of course, there have always been families with wealth who use that wealth to try to get their children to the next level. I think this is a tale as old as time. It's just a criminal one this time.
Yeah, so we've got to go to a break. When we come back from the break, more on this. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
For the last few decades, we've been scolded by everyone from radical environmentalists to simple back-to-the-nature advocates that we have overly industrialized society. It must be dismantled. We need to adopt the ways of the past. I thought about this when reading a commentary by Jeffrey Tucker. He was watching a video by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was trying to explain why the Earth is headed for an ecological disaster and why we probably shouldn't be having any more children. But he says he was distracted because she was saying all this while carefully cutting sweet potatoes before putting them in the oven. She put salt and pepper on them. Tucker reminds us that salt was so rare during most of human history that it was often regarded as money. Then we figured out how to produce and distribute salt to every table of the world. She was cutting the sweet potatoes with a steel knife. It took generations of metallurgists to figure out how to make steel reliably and affordably. Before steel, there were bodies of water you could not cross without a boat because no one knew how to make an iron bridge that wouldn't sink. She put the sweet potatoes in an oven, but Tucker reminds us that she didn't have to chop down trees and build a fire like 99.99% of humanity had to until relatively recently. And where did she get those sweet potatoes? No one grows them in Washington, D.C. Where did the store get them? Until fairly recently, the sweet potato was trapped in distant places. Now they're flown on planes and shipped in ocean liners and brought to the store by trucks. All of those modes of transportation use fossil fuels. His point is something I've noticed. Many Americans, including members of Congress, enjoy the fruits of technology and capitalism, but at the same time want to eliminate the technological developments and free market benefits that provided them. It is short-sighted at best. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. We have been talking about the education. I don't even know what to call this. College gate.
College gate.
Yeah. I'm thinking about ways to be able to describe this. We're talking about the largest ever case alleging bribery to get kids into colleges that broke yesterday is involving Desperate Housewives, star Felicity Huffman, Lori Loughlin of Full House fame, and now we're finding out there's just so many implications that are coming from this. But I think one of the things that I was reminded of, and one of the things I'd love to hear your perspective on, Chelsey, is this reality that, yes, the parents are the ones that cheated, the parents are the ones that acted unethically in order to get their kids into these schools and into these programs, thereby keeping certain other students from getting access and based on their merits. But one of the things I found so interesting is I was doing some research for the Daily Briefing, is that this type of behavior isn't simply just limited to parents. And so bear with me, some of these statistics, I thought some of them were pretty shocking. 1 in 7 recent college graduates paid someone to complete their assignments for them. So in a recent poll, 61% of college students admitted to some form of cheating. 33% of high school students admitted they used the internet to plagiarize an assignment. And this behavior obviously doesn't stop once they leave school. In a 2017 study, 55% of respondents saw employees alter numbers for self-gain. So cheating is this personal decision that has these communal repercussions, and what we're seeing now is some of those repercussions that are going out. But Chelsey, from a legal standpoint, we know the ethics of it is just horrendous. We know that there's just no excuse for this. But from a legal standpoint, you were sharing earlier, there is such a high bar to prove kind of, I guess you would, this would be this bribery. So help us understand some of the charges that were brought and then the significance of these charges relative to the punishment that is potentially there.
Right. So bribery is obviously the biggest one that is being brought. And it was bribery, fraud, and what was the third?
Good question.
Okay.
So, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, honest services mail fraud, according to the paperwork.
Yes. Okay. So mail fraud is, there are a lot of elements that have to be proven to prove a case for fraud, because otherwise people would complain constantly about things they purchased not working out. So that you have to have an intent to fraud, an exchange of something of value based on a lie. And that's all things that we have. And then the final is injury. And so I'm curious to see, is it the universities that are really injured from this, from getting students who aren't eligible? Is it other students? I'm not really sure how they're going to go about tackling that element, but no doubt there's a lot of criminal activity here. Now, one of the things that always surprised me as a law student is how high the penalties for fraud can be. So I saw an individual put away for 17 years for $2.5 million worth of fraud. So depending on how big the scheme is, how pervasive it is, how many people are involved, all those are things that a judge would consider. But these individuals could be going to jail for 15, 20, 25 years, depending on how much money was exchanged. So it's definitely not a joke. It's not something that they'll get off after a year or two. I mean, if proven and found guilty, these individuals are really facing maybe even parts of their lifetimes in prison.
That's unbelievable. So Lori Loughlin, for example, and her husband allegedly agreed to pay bribes totaling $500,000 in exchange for their 2 daughters designated as recruits to the USC crew team, even though they did not participate in crew, according to the complaint that was offered up relative to Felicity Huffman of Desperate Housewives fame. She was accused of paying $15,000 to a fake charity, the Key Worldwide Foundation, to facilitate cheating for her daughter on the ACTs. It's these type of things, Chelsey, that I continue to go back to think that these are just the little. This is like taking a little pickaxe to the foundations of kind of those cultural foundations, those formative societal foundations: education, police, firefighters, government, business. It's these type of we're just taking when these things get uncovered, it's like we're eroding the foundational components of our society. And it seems very detrimental, not simply just to the integrity of the institution, but holistically across the spectrum. I'm worried, I guess, is probably the best way to put it.
I think lack of integrity is obviously the first characteristic that comes to mind. We're in a culture where there is a lot of striving and performance. I know there always probably has been, but we have students and kids, and we're in this generation where everybody knows someone who had 2 and 3 activities after school every single night of the week, whether that's being involved in multiple sports plus academic clubs. I mean, it is very competitive to get into universities these days. There's a lot of pressure. There's, not to mention, AP, IB courses. So really having that perfect academic stellar resume to get into a university or to get in on scholarship is something I think that's idolized. And I think it takes away from really the point, which is to have families that have dinner together and are cohesive and talking and looking at each other instead of being so busy running around trying to perform so that they can get to that next level. So this is that, obviously, to a maximum extreme. In your
experience when you were in school, was cheating prevalent around you? Was that something that was?
So I went to a pretty academically rigorous school. Basically, it was a massive nerdery. We were all a bunch of nerds together. And it was not cheating, but yes, that it was very high performing, and the students had high expectations of themselves. The parents often put a lot of pressure on their students, but at the end of the day, no one respected the cheaters. In fact, if someone found out that someone else was cheating, they would. I know people who reported it to the principal because
snitches.
Well, they're competitive. If you find out someone in your AP course is cheating and running the curve for everyone, almost out of maybe not the right mentality, it was not respected. It was frowned upon because we were all in this together and we were all working to perform at a high level. And someone cheating, that was the epitome of a slap in the face to your classmates and camaraderie.
Steve Marioble says that's, at the end of the day, that's how you eradicate cheating from a system, is that it's such a competitive atmosphere that individuals hold grudges and eventually, for lack of a better term, snitches.
That's what it was.
That I know that this person has a competitive advantage from an unethical standpoint, and so I'm going to eradicate that unethical standpoint. And it can be for altruistic is probably not the right word for it. It can be for good purposes, because at the end of the day, this person just should not have this competitive advantage. I think one of the things that's most frightening to me, well, I don't want to say frightening, because I think cheating's always happened. Like, I don't think this is anything new. What I think is significant here is the level to which we have certain institutions, and parents would probably be the better word for it. We have certain parents that are the lengths that they're willing to go. I think this is starting to reveal a little bit more of just this rat race that we find ourselves in. And what's so frustrating to me is to recognize that we're in the greatest country in the history of the world, and in this free enterprise system. You've got Lori Loughlin's daughter, who has made quite a name for herself and has achieved a level of significance simply because of one of these new opportunities known as YouTube. And there's a traditional way for her to be able to go through and be credentialed and go through those processes and means, and that's by getting a college degree from a reputable institution. But even though she didn't want to go to school and she expressed concern about going to school, it seems as though they were forcing her to go to this school. And I think that's just one of the detriments, because she was thriving and achieving success on her own doing the YouTube thing and being a YouTube personality, which in reality, I mean, then that's what we want. School, for 99% of people, is to be able to be cognitively formed, to be able to understand how I might be able to go into the world and be trained. And it seems as though the parent was pushing her into a old way of doing things, and in turn acted unethically to be able to achieve that end.
Right. I mean, there was no end to how unethical this whole situation was, but I think it just goes to show people idolizing, really elitism and status and all of those things, which again, I think that I've never heard of anything like this, but at a smaller scale and a non-criminal scale, elitists wanting to get their children ahead, or people are always trying to fight to get their children ahead. And so this is that, I think, to the maximum extreme, let go, which is unfortunate. But at the end of the day, we're supposed to believe in something higher than our academia and something higher than an athletic status, right? I think that the point is God has a path for each student. And, and I think as a mom, even my own 2-year-old's not yet like going to be competitive in school or anything, but I'm like, I don't want him going to a university he's not supposed to be at. Because I know God has a plan for him. I want him to be at the school that he's supposed to be at, so he thrives. And the mentality is to glorify the Lord with your work and not just to have a great resume, I think.
That's really good. Okay, so we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll have Cole Feix with us from the organization, So to Speak Media, about some of the work that he's doing. You're going to want to stick around for that. We'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable, I'm joined by Chelsey Youman here in studio, but we've also got over the phone for the next 30 minutes, we've got Cole Feix, who's the president of So We Speak Media, which is a media company designed to keep Christians informed about the world without being conformed to it. He writes a weekly newsletter called The Weekly Speak and hosts the So We Speak podcast. Cole, how are you, man?
Hey, I'm great. Glad to be with you guys.
So great to have you here. So tell our audience a little bit more about So We Speak, this organization that you're a part of and you're leading up.
Yeah, well, So We Speak started really as just my own personal journey to deal with what I kind of felt was the corrosive effect of the 24-hour media cycle.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think that we have to come to grips with is Twitter, Facebook, all the access that we have to news is really great. In one sense, we have more at our fingertips than anybody in history has ever had. But at the same time, the trends that we're seeing are not necessarily all positive. And especially when it comes to Twitter and social media, I just felt increasingly like it was difficult to find out what was actually going on. I mean, we live in the world of hot takes. We get to see what everybody's opinion is, but it's hard to find out what actually happened in any circumstance. And when you couple that with the conviction I have that Christians need to know what's going on so that we can engage, so that we can share our faith, so that we can fight for justice, we really need to know what's happening. So started writing a newsletter with a couple other writers, launched the website. We do a podcast every week, and what we're really trying to do is just be informed, be able to speak, like it says in 1 Thessalonians 2, to be able to speak to please God, but also to speak in a way that is impacting our society.
That's phenomenal. So really you're engaging current conversations and trying to bring the biblical narrative into the space and really trying to help Christians is what it sounds like. So tell us, so for our listeners, what are some of those conversations that you're a part of right now? What are some of those conversations that you find are recurring all throughout for this little stretch, and how is a Christian to engage that? So give us an example.
So one of the things this week that I wrote about in the newsletter is the conversations that are going on about socialism in the United States.
Yeah.
And there, on so many of these issues, it's not just a question of, well, what's the received wisdom from a Christian standpoint on this topic? Because when it comes to the things that were said at South by Southwest this week, is there something biblical that we can apply to that? And some of those conversations get really confusing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we believe that all truth is God's truth. So how do we bring a biblical worldview in an intelligent way, in a loving way, in a grace-filled way, to talk about something like the drift towards democratic socialism or straight-out socialism on the left in the United States right now?
So help us understand, because I think this is a really interesting topic, and plus I think you're right on with that. You've got the pulse, and it seems as though the polls are increasing. Polls indicate that, especially among Generation Z, that there's this pretty significant jump of individuals that approve of socialism, even among millennials. I mean, we saw that's different pretty significantly. So a poll by Axios indicated that 37% of the total adult group surveyed prefer living in a socialist country. Among millennials, that was 49%, but then even Generation Z, it was much higher. And so help us to understand, why is socialism on the uptick today?
Well, I think one of the things that Christians bring to this conversation that's valuable but cuts a little bit against the political and religious grain is, there is something wrong with rewarding selfishness for the sake of selfishness. So I think there is a rage in some corners of society, especially among the young, of, hey, things are not fair. And, when you start talking about the 1% versus the 99%, I think the reaction that you're hearing is, hey, why doesn't everybody have the same opportunity? But then if you pivot and you say, okay, let's take that and let's say this cultural moment is so unique in the history of the world. We don't have to fight for a lot of the sustenance that we have. Like, I mean, most people in these polls are not wondering where their next meal is going to come from. A lot of them have never experienced going to war, losing people to war. A lot of times, I think some of where this comes from is we don't understand what it took to get to where we are. So when you think about economic models, for example, I think one of the things that we need to think about is, as Christians, can we embrace the thought that in capitalism, if you raise the overall water level for everyone, and even if that means that the very richest people in society get richer, isn't that a way of finding justice for the least, for the most disenfranchised? Mm-hmm. Now, back to what I was saying earlier, it's hard to say, hey, this is what Christians should believe. But what I do think is we can bring principles. So one of the things I'm saying there is, if we're looking out for the marginalized and the disenfranchised, and we have a long view, so we view people as spiritual beings, we view them as people who have physical needs, we believe that God is the ultimate provider of everything that we need. How do we go about using what we have to solve that problem? And I think that breaks it out from just, okay, liberals and Democrats are socialists, they're drifting that way. People on the right have to embrace a full-fledged, uninhibited capitalism, as beautiful as I think capitalism is. Maybe we can bring some principles to the conversation and start to examine these arguments wherever we fall on the spectrum.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found particularly interesting is I think we all agree that I think one of the reasons why socialism is starting to see such a rise right now is because individuals largely, I mean, the idea of it is rooted in care. Individuals want people to be taken care of. And so that when they hear about student debt, when they hear about individuals that are underemployed, when they hear about individuals that are that have great need, there's a genuine and I think a godly desire to want to help those individuals. Now, where I would disagree with someone that's advocating for socialism is I would just say that the government is not the vehicle by which those needs can be properly met, will be properly met, and the future will be seen as secure and prosperous if it does so. What we've seen about the past, especially, I'm always captivated by what Mark Twain says, is the past doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so when we look to the past and look at past instances and examples of quasi-socialist, because I don't know if there's ever been variations of socialism that have taken place around the world, it hasn't ended well. But what we see within the capitalistic system, which again, it's not necessarily the government is not the main conduit in order to be able to provide for those needs, but it does create a system whereby the church has an opportunity. These altruistic organizations, these intermediary organizations have an opportunity to be able to meet some of these needs. And I think probably whenever I read some of these socialists, whenever I read these surveys that talk about the rise in socialism, one of the things I always go to is just we're seeing it, especially among the younger, but the younger are also the ones that are less invested in kind of some of these social structures, these associations, these factions, is what our founders would say. They're not invested in these entities that are meeting the needs. They're just not doing it at a significant and public level like the government would be. Hence the reason why there's a push towards wanting the government to be able to meet those needs. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. I think if you want to trace a thread through Christians' engagement with politics on nearly any issue right now, I would point this out. I would say, if you look biblically, it's exactly like you described. The Bible does not attribute the power to the government to be the agent of social change. It attributes that power to individuals, to families, and to the church. And I wonder on both sides of the political aisle if some of what we're seeing from Christians isn't frustration with a lack of change in the church. So then you go somewhere else to find change, whether that be a cause, whether that be a political party, whether that be increased government spending for entitlements, whether that be initiatives for justice. I mean, all of those things do come from an ethic of care, or at least most of the time they do. But I wonder if we're not misattributing who's actually supposed to bring about change in society.
Yeah. we're going to have to take a break here, but I think we're of the same mind on this particular issue. One of the things that I'm just a little frustrated by, and again, it's the understanding that I see the validity, and I recognize the care that the other side has for those that are the least of these, is what Matthew would say in Matthew 25. But I would argue and I would differ as to how those needs might be addressed. And so we got to run to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to continue talking to Cole Feix. Cole is the president of So We Speak Media, is a media company designed to keep Christians informed about the world without being conformed to it. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, I'll be really interested. I want to jump around a little bit. He's got an article that he highlights in his news magazine about the lonely people, which I think is pretty pertinent at this particular point. But we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt-of-the-earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. "It was the proudest moment of my life," said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitt. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. We have got in studio Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We've got over the phone, we've got Cole Feix, who is the president of the So We Speak Media Group. And Cole, you put out a lot of information. I think really I'm significantly interested, especially in this newsletter. I'm going through and I'm seeing all these great reads that you've kind of coalesced into one particular to read. I'm assuming it goes to their email. So help us understand. I'm really interested on this article that you highlighted that talks about the loneliness. I would argue the loneliness epidemic. Help us understand that.
Well, loneliness, I think, is one of the social problems is kind of lurking beneath the surface. The article I linked to is a really good article in Table Talk magazine. It's written by Scott Dever, but he really just hits the tip of the iceberg. There's a Cigna survey from last month that talks about 54% of people feel lonely and 40% say they lack true companionship. In addition to that, I think it was a few months ago that in England they appointed a minister of loneliness for the public because it's just such a widespread social problem. And the reason I wanted to dig down on that one a little bit is because I feel like of all the people in the entire world, Christians are so uniquely positioned to come at this and to solve this problem. I mean, we believe that the God of the universe is interested in you and made you in his image and has invited you into a relationship with him. That's the bedrock for solving the problem of loneliness. So if we want to get after something socially, this is a great opportunity.
What are some of the contributing factors, just based on some of your research that you've done, that have brought about this loneliness epidemic? Like I'm fascinated in it. One, and I'm thinking about earlier this month, even NBA Commissioner David Silver spoke candidly about the mental health of players in the league, and he observed that there's been a transition from the Chicago Bulls of Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, B.J. Armstrong, etc. There was this band of brothers mentality, but now it's almost as if it's an every man for himself. And so even NBA players now are a part of this. They're not immune to the pangs of loneliness. And so what would you attribute some of those factors that's causing this loneliness epidemic to continue to burble up within the culture today?
Well, I'd at least start the conversation by pointing to two things. The first one is what we've become used to in the age of social media is not the ability to relate to other people face to face, but to cultivate and mediate and augment our relationships with other people through the accounts that we curate. And I'll never forget one of the most profound insights into that I've ever heard. I was listening to Ben Stewart give a talk, and he said he was talking to a couple hundred high school students, and he said, "Hey, just imagine with me for a moment that you didn't have to keep up an online presence. You didn't have to post. You didn't have to show people the best parts of you. You didn't have to worry about what people were going to think because of your online presence. You could just know people." He said the room erupted into applause. And so I would point to that first of all and say what we're training ourselves to do is distance ourselves from people, while at the same time, and I think this is really the insidious combination, while at the same time believing that we're more connected than we've ever been before. And the second thing to point out, I think one of the most important books that's been written in the past couple of years is The Coddling of the American Mind. And one of the things they point out in there is the stats on the rise of anxiety and suicide is astronomical, something like 300% increase since 2012 for female college students, and male college students aren't far behind. And part of the reason is we don't know how to be ourselves unmediated. And the way that we respond to other people is, especially when we're in person, is not something that we practiced as much as, say, somebody 100 years ago. Whether that's family, whether that's friends, acquaintances, people that we meet, I think we are perpetuating some really harmful habits in our society.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've been fascinated with, and especially it's not just limited, because sometimes I think when you hear about loneliness, you typically think, one, smartphones, you think about technology, and then two, you think about what's happening relative to like just being consumed in your phone. Like Sherry Turkle, Reclaiming Conversation, says we're alone together now. That there used to be a day that these phones would connect us one with another, technology would connect us, but now it's the very thing that disconnects us. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I'm increasingly interested in is how this is rippling out into just outside of kind of a younger generation. There was even recent research that was put out like 10 years over 10 years, the average senior adult 60 and above now watches 30 minutes more TV than what they did 10 years ago. And one of the ways that they're attributing that is that they're not getting to interact with individuals that are younger in age, which you can argue that they're not interacting with them because they're not showing up. You can talk. There's been a very steady, I guess, stability when it comes to nursing homes. So it's not like more individuals are sending older individuals off to nursing homes. It's just that there's not the interaction that's happening. And when that interaction's not happening, we're missing out on quite a bit. And so I just wonder, what are some, from your vantage point, because it seems as though you're very well read, you're understanding what's happening in the larger culture, you're thinking about this loneliness epidemic. Are there other outliers? Are there other kind of compounding effects that are happening across society that we need to be attuned to, or maybe we can have eyes to see? Because I think it's really clear for us just to understand, well, yeah, it's not good for man to be alone, especially from a Christian perspective. We know that. We know that we've got to be good friends. We know that iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another man. We know the biblical perspective to it, but help us think it from a cultural standpoint, especially with your vantage point. What are some of the other compounding effects of this loneliness epidemic that we're beginning to see that we need to have eyes to see in order to move forward?
I think you bring up a great point with the fracturing of society by age, demographically by age.
Oh, yeah, the age segregation that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, and whether it's on if we want to talk cultural structure level, there's just more opportunity to be around people who are like you, who are the same age as you are. But then even from an individual standpoint, there are less social institutions that you can engage in that allow you the opportunity to meet people of different age groups. And so I know in my own life, one of the things I've noticed is I did college ministry for 6 years, and it's easy to just have a college ministry, and the college kids basically all hang out together, and the people that mentor them are 3 years older than they are, and that's kind of the ecosystem that you cultivate. Whereas I think healthy churches, healthy societal organizations, and each one of us would be better off if we would look for ways to cultivate friendships, mentorships, even just groups that we can be a part of that have an entire spectrum of age groups and people. So what I've tried to do is the easiest way I've found to generate relationships with older people outside of your family, I mean, family is a great place to start, is to take advantage of the mentorship opportunities that come. So whether that's in your career, whether that's in your faith, whether that's in a hobby that you have, can you find somebody who's willing to give you, 30 minutes to an hour a month? It doesn't have to be a ton, but just as a starting place to say, hey, help me, or here's a couple of questions I have. Let me know what you think. I mean, just getting your foot in the door on a few of those things, I think, makes a huge difference. It's a perspective changer, at least, to get started.
Completely agree on that. So, Cole Feix, thank you so much for joining us. If you are interested in finding out more information about Cole and his organization, So We Speak, you can look on their website at sowespeak.com, or you can make your way over to the Point of View website, pointofview.net. We've got all the information to Cole and more about his organization, but we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we'll be joined by someone new, I believe, and then we'll also be talking a little bit more about the news of the day. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, for this second hour of Point of View, the Millennial Roundtable. I'm joined at the Roundtable. I'm outnumbered, y'all. I'm outnumbered. 1, by women. 2, by individuals that work for First Liberty, and I am in desperate need of your help. But let me introduce them here for a second. So, of course, we're joined by Chelsey Youman, First Liberty Institute extraordinaire, mom of 2, wife of 1.
Wife, that's right.
Wife of 1.
I have a husband in case there was confusion.
And Chelsey's joining us, obviously, from the first hour as well, because we had quite a show. First hour, we talked a little bit about the college debacle that happened relative to government officials being able to break open this case that indicated that upwards of 50 individuals have been now indicted for bribery, trying to get kids into colleges. We'll be talking a little bit about that in the forefront, and so Chelsey was bringing a little bit of the legal perspective on that, but just really bringing some great stuff. And then also we've got Keisha Russell of First Liberty Institute. Keisha, so glad you're here today.
Thanks for having me on.
So good, so good. She's got to put up with me. Probably, I mean, that's a good thing, right, Chelsey? I feel really good about this.
It's great.
Yeah, with my dad jokes and my corniness. And so, nevertheless, we're so excited that Keisha is here with us. And then we'll also be talking a little bit about what's happened relative to what's happening on some of these college campuses, or individuals that are trying to get on these college campuses, the lengths that they're willing to go. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then also, I'm really interested in talking about in this hour about what's about this campus culture. Specifically, there was a new study that was put out that indicated that an alarming number of Republican students, college students, feel unsafe on campus. And so I think this is going to be one of those things for our audience that they know that we just kind of go back and forth on this. And I'm probably just going to assume the devil's advocate role, Chelsey. So whatever position you end up taking,
you love losing,
I
Nick.
will end up losing in the opposite position. But I'm okay with that. Okay. It's probably some inculcating a little bit of humility inside of me, which is always a welcome thing. And so let's go ahead and jumpstart kind of a conversation that we talked about at the forefront that I really want to get to as well during the first part of this hour, and that's what's happened on college campuses. So Felicity Huffman of the fame Desperate Housewife, Lori Loughlin of Full House fame, Aunt Becky, they've wronged us, they've hurt us, because they are among the 50 that were indicted in the largest ever case alleging bribery to get kids into colleges. And so just to kind of update you all, the Justice Department charged 33 affluent parents, which include CEOs, television stars, with taking part in an elaborate conspiracy that involved cheating on the SAT and ACT, and parents paying coaches, quote, enormous sums to accept students who fabricated their athletic credentials at elite universities. And so Lori Loughlin, obviously Full House fame, appears destined to go to the big house. And so Chelsey, is this help us to understand this one? Is this just really just a lot of parent pressure? Is this just like the remnants of the meritocracy beginning to crumble, showing lines? Help us to think through this for a second.
That's a big theory there, Nick.
I know.
I think that it's a tale as old as time that the affluent parents try to get their kids off on the best foot possible. So in and of itself, I think that desire just to be able to provide for your children and make sure that they have the best foot forward, that's not in and of itself a bad desire. But to go to the level of criminal activity and a fraudulent scheme in the millions. 50 people are indicted. That's a significant scheme.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'll see when I interned with a federal district judge here in Dallas, I saw probably half a dozen fraud cases. Usually it's one or two individuals, and many of them went away 17, 20, 25 years. So we're not talking small imprisonment here. We're talking big penalties, real imprisonment in federal prison. If they really prove up the case. And by the time the federal government is involved and onto something like this, they often have a lot of evidence to back up the convictions and the charges. So I just think that at the end of the day, what we're seeing is that that obsession we have with elitism and high academia and performance for our kids. This is that let go to a
and
far
we're seeing
extreme.
a bunch of fake stuff too. I think that's Keisha. Like that's one of the things that's so interesting to me. Like you have these parents, and there's certain examples within the story that we're finding out more as we read some of the court documents that indicate that they were photoshopping their kids playing sports that they don't play in order to get positions on a team that they'll never play for more than a day. There's instances where you have individuals that are literally going to Dick's Sporting Goods, which is a local sporting goods, or I guess national sporting goods store, and that they're buying this equipment and they're having their kids pose in pools for water polo or or on lacrosse fields to be able to to try to position themselves in these spots so that this middleman can then get them into this school. Like this seems as though it's this lawnmower parenting. Like we used to have helicopter parenting that was just there in case something bad happens. Right. Now this is like another example of this lawnmower parenting that they're going before their kids, preparing the way. Instead of preparing their kids for the way, they're preparing the way for their kids.
Yeah, definitely. I think sends the wrong message too about what's really important. And, just the lengths that you're willing to go to just to get a certain name on your resume or a certain school, when it's very possible that these students could have gone to any other school and it would have been just as good of an experience for them. But for whatever reason, it was so important to the parents to pay for it and to scheme and defraud people in order to achieve it. And I think that's really a shame, really, because there's a lot of students that we, can't ever identify or point to, but might have been able to get into those schools if those spots weren't taken up.
I think that's one of the interesting things, Chelsey, because it seems as though that we have these two worlds that are blending together in this one particular story. And I tried to communicate this during the first hour, and I did a horrible job. And so I'm going to try again. Try again. So you've got these two worlds. And so you've got one world that's this meritocracy world that, one, you do certain things, you go through certain channels, you become a part of certain clubs, you go to certain colleges, then you get certain jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And so you earn your credentials through those merits. But then you have, just in this beautiful free enterprise system, you have this opportunity to chart your own way now and to be able to earn credibility outside of those institutional names that you've got. And so instead of going to the Ivies, you go and start on YouTube, which is Lori Loughlin, his daughter, is the prime example of this. And it seems as though her mother was forcing her. I don't know if she was forcing her. She was very much paving the way for her to achieve this one. But then you've got her daughter that's like, well, I can just talk on my computer camera to people on YouTube because I've got millions of people that are listening to me on YouTube, which is, again, it's different, but you're still achieving a level of success that if you went the other way as well.
Well, I think, this might also be a generational thing because my parents were both of them first generation college graduates.
Okay.
So they, in their, I don't know if you call it day and age, I'm not sure, but when they were being raised, college was optional.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that. I think it is a huge blessing to be able to go to college, but it is definitely something that is a lot more necessary in order to enter a workforce. There has to be a lot of jobs require a university level degree or some kind of a graduate degree in order to even apply and be considered. And so I think, maybe that was part of the consideration, is just this drive to have your child go to a school just to ensure their future.
They're going to drive to go to school. We're going to drive to a break. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
For the last few decades, we've been scolded by everyone from radical environmentalists to simple back-to-the-nature advocates that we have overly industrialized society. It must be dismantled. We need to adopt the ways of the past. I thought about this when reading a commentary by Jeffrey Tucker. He was watching a video by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was trying to explain why the Earth is headed for an ecological disaster and why we probably shouldn't be having any more children. But he says he was distracted because she was saying all this while carefully cutting sweet potatoes before putting them in the oven. She put salt and pepper on them. Tucker reminds us that salt was so rare during most of human history that it was often regarded as money. Then we figured out how to produce and distribute salt to every table of the world. She was cutting the sweet potatoes with a steel knife. It took generations of metallurgists to figure out how to make steel reliably and affordably. Before steel, there were bodies of water you could not cross without a boat because no one knew how to make an iron bridge that wouldn't sink. She put the sweet potatoes in an oven, but Tucker reminds us that she didn't have to chop down trees and build a fire like 99.99% of humanity had to until relatively recently. And where did she get those sweet potatoes? No one grows them in Washington, D.C. Where did the store get them? Until fairly recently, the sweet potato was trapped in distant places. Now they're flown on planes and shipped in ocean liners and brought to the store by trucks. All of those modes of transportation use fossil fuels. His point is something I've noticed. Many Americans, including members of Congress, enjoy the fruits of technology and capitalism, but at the same time want to eliminate the technological developments and free market benefits that provided them. It is short-sighted at best. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined in studio by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Keisha Russell, also of the First Liberty Institute. And here we are, and it's just me of Institute for Global Engagement at Dallas Baptist University. So I'm in the Institute family, at least.
You are.
Yeah. So maybe I
absolutely.
put Institute at the front instead of the back, and then this is a really bad line of thinking that I'm going to go on. So I'm just going to deviate from it now.
Did you lie, cheat, and steal to get into your institute?
Oh yeah, I did. I had to bribe. I mean,
Apparently
honestly, so I guess we're a national audience now. So y'all know I'm from Tennessee, and so I'm just grateful that these Texans have decided to allow me to be a part of this great state, and that hopefully one day they'll come to the full recognition of all that Tennessee has contributed to the richness of Texas, starting with Davy Crockett. I mean, let's just be honest.
We can agree on that.
It's
something we can all agree on.
Foundational. So you're welcome, Texas, for Davy Crockett. And then hopefully one day, we were actually talking about this over the break, hopefully one day they will come to taste and see and know that pork is the true barbecue. Because right now they have this, and I'm sure our listeners know, right now they just have this broken understanding that thinks that beef brisket is real barbecue. But even though it's good, I don't know why you settle for good when you can have glorious.
We will never agree on this.
Yeah, so I'm a brisket girl. So
oh my goodness. Now I'm continuing to be outnumbered, but I'm okay with this because the biblical narrative is on my side.
Ooh.
And so, see, there's a reason why God forbid us to eat pork in the Old Testament. It's because he knew we'd worship it. And so I think there's a robust theological.
I feel like some callers are going to call and set you straight, Nick.
Let's hope not. But nevertheless, let's keep on going, shall we? So I've just been captivated by this story that we were talking about relative to this huge breaking news that happened yesterday relative to the 50 individuals that were indicted in the largest ever case alleging bribery to get kids into college. And again, Chelsey, one of the things that I wanted to go back on, or Keisha, you as well, is just this mentality. It's like two different worlds colliding. You have Lori Loughlin's daughter that has decided, like even on her YouTube page, she really didn't want to be in school. She wasn't expressing great satisfaction and joy that she was going to USC because she had achieved great success. That's a relative term. She had achieved success on YouTube, having a certain number of followers, and that can be very profitable in our kind of market economy today. That there's individuals that want to tune in, and then in turn, those are eyeballs. So advertisers want eyeballs on their products, and so achieving some level of success there. And then YouTube also paying her just because that they're a part of her. And Amazon, I think, was also one of those that were paying her. But nevertheless, that's down into the weeds. But I think it's just so interesting, the dichotomy that we find here relative to a parent just wants good for her child and is going to great lengths to be able to achieve that good, even using bad means to get to a good end. But then we also see this daughter that is just kind of utilizing her creative spirit and finding a niche and finding a need in the market and satisfying that need by talking into a computer. And in turn, that's creating some level of profitability and in turn, hopefully engaged citizenry. So I just think that's a fascinating dichotomy. So between these two worlds. But again, it's completely unethical what happened. Relative to Felicity Huffman, relative to Lori Loughlin, relative to all of these individuals. Keisha, thoughts?
Well, I think that, I think there's also something to be said for how far you're willing to go as a parent.
Oh, yeah.
To just give your child the life you want for him or her as opposed to the life they want for themselves. And I think sometimes when you're 18 or 19 years old, your parents are just trying to force you to do things because they know in the end it's going to be better for you.
Yeah.
If you have a degree or if you go to a certain college or whatever. But then the other side of that coin is, well, what do these kids want for themselves, for their own lives? And how do you as a parent sort of like balance, that dilemma?
So Keisha brings up a really great point. And Chelsey, as a mom, not a new mom, because you've been doing this for 2
years. I would call myself still a new mom.
Still a new mom.
I'm open to any and all advice.
Yeah, but I mean, I think David Brooks touches on this in The Road to Character, as well as in On Paradise Drive in a couple of his works. He touches on this desire to live vicariously through your child, and one of the ways that he epitomizes this is, now obviously this is a story that's breaking, that's captivating all our eyeballs because it's on the headlines. But one of the ways that this subtly works its way out, according to Brooks, is on these playing fields, so on the t-ball field. And so you see all these parents that are very much engaged, some might even say wrapped up and obsessed in their child's success on the field, is because they're willing to go to great lengths to make sure that their child succeeds on that field, because in turn that child's success on the field reflects on them and is a part of them as well. How would you combat that? How would you respond?
I always do this. I have a question in this statement, but my question is, I wonder if that's a predominantly male or female temptation into vicariously, because it might be a competitive. I'm not sure. I don't personally relate to that yet. Again, my oldest is 2.5. So to me, success for my 2-year-old looks like him learning to use the potty, which is our biggest stress issue right now, leading to very funny conversations in my house. But I can't relate to that yet. I'm not there yet. But what I can say is I do find my inclination is more to protect my child. And so I have found myself wanting to, not helicopter mom, but make things easier and not ever want him to struggle. And he went to this he goes part-time to a little class, and he moved up in the next age group and didn't have a friend yet in that class. And he really struggled for a couple of weeks. And I told my husband, we're pulling him out. I'm going to quit my job. We can't, he can't let him go through this. He's so sad. And sure enough, he is thriving within a couple of weeks. But I needed, as a mom, for the first time to see my kid learn do something that maybe wasn't the easiest thing for him yet. And people can judge whether that's wise or not. I'm not sure, but there's always this inclination to protect from harm or failure or hurt feelings. And I think that could easily go to being a helicopter mom and going too far and saying, I'll go to any length to make sure he has success. But I actively tell myself when I could step in, he's playing with something and is like, I can't do this, Mom, will you help? I actively stop myself and say, why don't you try again? I think you can. And just giving children that ability to fail.
Yeah.
And that freedom to try things out. And I want him to have that. There's an adventure and a beauty, I think, to learning things on your own and sometimes the hard way. And I would think hopefully by the time he's 18, I'm able to say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you bring up a really great point that there's been some great work on. So Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. Cole Feix just talked about it or mentioned it in the previous segment. One of the things that he talks about is we're seeing this shift from what we always termed popularly is this idea of the helicopter mom, the helicopter parent, because it's not just limited to moms. Helicopter parent is just hovering above their child, and whenever their child is hurt, whenever their child experiences difficulty, then to drop in to help and then to go back up top. Well, we're seeing a paradigm shift now to move away from that helicopter mentality towards a lawnmower parenting. So whereas the helicopters are there so that when they experience difficulty, they're there to help, the lawnmower is I'm paving the way so that they will never experience any difficulty. They'll never experience any harm. They'll never experience. And so this overreaction has caused some detrimental effects. And a couple of things that he's pointed to is not letting your kids play out in the neighborhood anymore because of the fear of getting abducted, which is a legitimate fear. Which is
in this day and age.
But one of the things that what he points to relative to the data is that there's been this drastic downtick, like minuscule number of individuals that are not getting abducted as kids anymore. There's just child abduction is very low right now, and it's almost to an overreaction because of that. Or peanut allergies. And so what they found about peanut allergies is they increase in prevalence. More and more kids are having peanut allergies because more and more kids aren't being exposed to peanuts at a low level. So even though there was this good faith effort to try to keep your kid from getting from having a reaction to peanut allergy, in turn keeping them from it has in turn created more individuals that have peanut allergy. So it's the sense of a little bit of difficulty is conducive a little bit. And I think when we look at this story, Keisha, like it just is, it's endemic of this. It seems like it's just parents going a little too far, and by going a little too far, going really far. I'll say in this instance, ends up not only hurting the kid but also hurting society as a whole.
Absolutely, because I saw some comments that have been posted on Lori Loughlin's daughter's pages, and they're just completely scathing. I mean, and if you listen to what she says about her own interest in going to those schools, it seems like, you know, she's paying for her mother's choices too. You know, I mean, she went along with it, of course, but this is obviously something that she didn't want to do. You know, she, now has to suffer for it.
Yeah. Well, we've got to take a break, but I'd love to hear your comments relative to the helicopter parenting and then the whole lawnmower parenting concept. What are your takes on that? Do you think it's gone too far? So you can call in 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. We've got Keisha Russell with us, as well as Chelsey Youman, both of the First Liberty Institute, and myself, representing Dallas Baptist University, the Institute for Global Engagement here as well. And we have been we've pivoted a little bit. And so we started talking about what everyone's talking about right now relative to these moms, dads, parents that have bribed certain individuals in order that they might be able, or bribed institutions and had an intermediary do that to get their children or to get a child into these into these colleges. And so it's the largest case that we're finding relative to bribery in colleges in U.S. history, but upwards of 50 people. But one of the things that we pointed to, and kind of a principle that's at root of this, kind of one of those first principles, is the idea of parenting. And it's very fascinating that we're starting to see this shift. And I want to speak from, I want to talk a little bit about personal experience. And so, Keisha, we'll let you lead us off. You'll be the one to go first and be vulnerable. This idea of the helicopter parenting and then the idea of lawnmower parenting. So again, to remind our listeners, helicopter parenting being allowing your child to have a little bit of difficulty, but dropping down and helping them as soon as they experience it, compared to a lawnmower parenting, which is I'm paving the way so that there'll be no difficulty whatsoever. Everything will be clear. Growing up, for me, it was much more helicopter parenting, I want to say. I experienced quite a bit of difficulty. I was awful at baseball. My dad called me frozen pizza in baseball because he says that I would never move when I was in the batter's box, and I was very unsatisfying. And so, there was that bit of, he was, to a certain degree, he was like allowing me to experience difficulty, but in turn, that shaping who I am to a large degree. And now, granted, it wasn't just, he's just calling me names the entirety of the time. But there was a sense of, he let me experience difficulty. My mom let me experience difficulty. And in turn, I think I'm better for it. Whereas today, there tends to be a propensity to keep kids from experiencing any of that difficulty. So in your experience, yourself, was it more helicopter parenting? Was it lawnmower parenting? The people that you're around today that are raising kids, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, for me, my parents gave me a lot of room and freedom and independence. So they were, I don't know, like airplane parents. I had a lot of freedom. Yeah. Which really worked for me, and that worked for my personality. And I think what I've seen is, parents who do, a really great job with one kid and think that same, perspective or that same approach is going to work for all of their children. So while that approach worked for me, it wasn't the best for all of my siblings either. Some of them needed a lot more attention, and they got it in the ways that they thought would be effective in getting that kind of attention, not always the best way. So I think one of the things that I try to remember in wanting to become a parent in the future is that, you're always going to have, a child perhaps that is going to defy your logic in terms of what you think should be working with them, and you just kind of have to adapt, right? I mean, that's what I saw growing up with my siblings and the way my parents approached parenting. And I think they were great parents, but it didn't work for all of us, their approach, even though there was not anything fundamentally flawed about the way they did things.
So, Chelsey, I'm going to flood you with questions right now.
Okay.
So there's a part
because
of
I have so many answers.
Yeah, because there's a part of me wants to know, how is your parenting? Were you helicopter parented, lawnmower parented as a kid? Has that changed? What the parenting that you saw modeled as a kid, is that emulated in your parenting style? And then I guess the third question would be, and this is probably one too many questions, would be, what do you think is the allure? Why do you think this lawnmower parenting has become more prevalent here in the U.S.?
Okay. So I was raised in a Christian home. I was very, very blessed to have two parents who loved the Lord, loved each other, and loved my sister and I. So I'll say that outright. I was very blessed in the home I was raised in that sense. So I think that they did the best they could to raise us in line with Scripture, and to have biblical principles in our house. And it wasn't perfect by any means, but it's hard for me to know exactly what a helicopter parent would be, because I don't have really a good reference point to compare it to. Yeah. But in our house, at least, we had a lot of freedom. There was a lot of trust. If we were with church kids, youth group kids, if we were with kids that they really trusted, there wasn't really that much of a curfew. There's no rules. But we knew that the minute we broke that trust, like our lives would be over. I'll never forget the time we came home way too late on a Friday night, and we'd just been with like youth group kids at Whataburger or something, not anything crazy. And my dad, his face when we woke him up to open that door was incredible.
Wow.
So, there just was a lot of respect there and understanding that there would be discipline. But I don't think we were overprotected. I think that there were a lot of rules. And we knew that we needed to follow them if we wanted to continue to have freedom. So with my kids, I don't know yet. They're still really little. I'm just now getting into real deal parenting with my 2-year-old in the last year. I might err on the side of being the softie, and my husband errs on the side of probably being the disciplinarian. I'm kind of a mush about things, and also everything Foster says is funny, and so it's really hard to be, serious. But I buck up and I set my boundaries, and we pray through it a lot. We're working on right now a lot of like forgiveness, teaching Foster to ask for forgiveness, and it's going well, but it's hard. I don't think there's a manual out there for this. There are lots of books. I've read a few, but really it's just trying to get back to the gospel. Paul David Tripp has a book, The 14 Gospel Principles of Parenting, and he has a philosophy that your authority over your child should at all times reflect God's authority. It's not about controlling your child. It's not about any of those things. It's about truly being an ambassador of the Lord's love and authority in their life and teaching them to love and respect authority. And so that's the philosophy I'm hopefully going to try to instill some. It's a great book.
I've got like 4 books that I'm writing right now on parenting, even though I don't.
You're writing?
Yeah, even though I don't have a kid. No, I'm just kidding. But I do wonder though. So this goes
hang
back
out with mine for a few days. Let me know how that goes.
Kids love me. Kids love me. So this is maybe the larger question that I want to get to right now is why is the lawnmower parenting style? I can understand the draw of it, right? Nobody, like I'm not a parent, but I've got a little niece, and my goodness, the joy that can well up inside of my spirit, as well as the anger that's there in case if something bad were to happen to her or somebody would hurt her. Like I'm emotionally, I'm like very invested, which indicates a great value that's within the system. So like I understand why the move towards that. I'm trying to work it out. Like what transitioned. Like what caused parenting to transition from when my dad was growing up, and my grandma would simply just have to flick the lights on the porch, and then my dad knew to come home from whatever he was doing, to where my parents, I had to be very keep them aware wherever I was. They had to know where I was or whose house I was at. To now, like even like hearing about some of these instances where there's just a sense that they don't even want it. It's like this constantly with their children. So I'm just trying to.
Well, the world is, to be fair, the world is a much different place than it was in our parents' generation, even from when I was a kid. So now millennials are having children. So our parenting style, who knows what kind of hot mess express that's going to be, because every generation has, I think, a flaw in
that's
that
a good
we're
word.
learning.
Hot mess express.
Yeah,
I don't want to move past that. I thought
no,
that was pretty
I
good.
think
Keep on going.
every generation has a thing, right, that is not ideal. My neighbor is a teacher in an elementary school, and she was telling me there was the technology generation where everyone's obsessed with their phones, but it was kind of a social experiment. And now we've seen really negative outcomes from that. And so now children going to elementary school, they don't have any access to smartphones. It's less TV. So there's been an equilibrium reached. So I think we have to continue to know our society is a dangerous one. I mean, the predators out there are higher than ever right now. I mean, the crimes that are out there are higher. Human trafficking is on the rise. So there are, I think, really valid reasons for being protective and having wisdom with your children and not just sending them to the wolves, so to speak. I heard one of the ways that human traffickers target their victims is they just hang out at the mall and they look for girls that are with one other friend who are alone or maybe look insecure, and they target them. So there are reasons, I think, to be careful and cautious in this world, but also to create maybe safe places, not safe spaces, safe places where there can be freedom, going to the park and like letting your kid loose. And I mean, there are ways to still allow them to have freedom without danger, maybe.
Yeah, just because, and here's where I'll go back, and I'll rebut rebut it by saying, I wonder if is the world any more dangerous than what it has been in the past, one, or two, are we just aware of the outlier situations that are awful that cause us to overreact and think the world is a scarier place than what it was? Which leads us, we're going to have to go to a break. And so when we come back from the break, we'll talk about that. But we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Do you think the world is a worse place for kids today? We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt of the earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Keisha Russell and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And we have been talking, it's the conversation started with the college bribery case, and then just how atrocious that was, but then kind of rooting out of that this idea that parents are going to greater lengths now, one, to be able to provide for them, two, to be able to try to help them in this journey. And it's gone to obviously a very unethical and wrong place relative to kind of the bribery that happened. And now some of these parents and individuals are going to be put into jail potentially for a significant period of time, which moves us into a larger conversation about just this parenting style that seems to be taking place right now, where we're moving away from what was once prevalent, that being helicopter parenting, to where allowing your children to be able to experience some bit of difficulty, but swooping down when they experience it, to now being in a place where your child, you are a lawnmower child, which is less preparing your child for the road, more preparing the road for your child, blocking out any hindrances or difficulties whatsoever so they can just run and sprint. Which raised the question for me, which I'm going to ask at the forefront and then hopefully take some of your phone calls, is this: do you think the world is a more difficult place today, or do you think we're just aware of certain instances, of certain outlier examples that make us think the world is a more difficult place? And we'd love to hear from you, because this is where I think is the crux of it, that if you think the world is a more difficult, harmful place, then of course you're going to parent a lot more closely with your child, because you're going to want to make sure you keep them safe from some of these horrors and evil individuals. But if we're just being inundated and we're not getting an accurate representation based upon what we know, then it's a false alarm. And so that's the question I want to pose to you all. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Is the world a more difficult place today than it was in previous generations? Is it more difficult to be a parent today than it was in previous generations? And so we're going to start taking some phone calls. We've got Larry in Indiana right now. Larry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for taking my call.
Hey, Larry, what's your point of view?
Well, first, I don't necessarily believe that the world is any more difficult or has a potential for harm for children than it used to. I think that I think because of social media and things like that, it's becoming drummed into a lot of people's minds that it is more difficult today than it used to. I like the young lady that spoke concerning helicopter parents, so I'd like to give you an example. I'm a parent, grandparent, and a great-grandparent, and I knew a couple married that had a son going to college. This is the ultimate helicopter parent. Husband worked during the week, the wife did not, in this case. And she went to the admissions office with her child, picked out the classes for her child, got an apartment near the university where her child went, stayed there during the week, and then they both come home on the weekends. Wow. That's the type of helicopter pilot. Now, that then, like you said, paving the road, though, but that's what they're doing now with these bribes and a lot of that stuff is they're preparing the journey for the child instead of preparing the child for the journey, and that should take place in the raising years between, I think, getting at third grade and older. The kids, they socialize less. They don't have the social skills. Mm-hmm. The morality is whatever is right to them is right. They don't have any type of parameters, boundaries, principles, or values that are firm that they operate by nowadays. And I think that has been prevalent over the last 35 years or so. The way the children grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s, now they are the parents now, and they're going based on their experiences then. And if a child does not learn those things from early on, they either do one of two things. They either withdraw and don't have those skills, or they go absolutely bonkers and they try to fit everything they can that they feel they missed into those college years, and that's where they go wrong. Then they try to make up for all the things they felt that they got left out on based on what they're seeing in the colleges when they arrive.
That's fascinating. Larry, well, thank you so much for your phone call. You bring up a great point, and man, a pretty significant example of renting an apartment. It's pretty interesting. And so let's go ahead and jump to another phone call. We've got Aneem from here in Texas. Is that how you pronounce your name?
No, it's Denim, like the blue jeans.
Oh, Enum. Okay, good deal, Enum. So tell me, what's your point of view?
I think the world is just as dangerous now as it was back then. It's just everybody has the internet and is more in tune with what's going on.
Really?
Back in the 50s, we didn't have the internet like we do now, so now you got kids and everybody else watching and see what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think I'm in your area, so thank you so much for your phone call, because it illuminates one particular point. So Chelsey, let's go back and forth on this, and she's smiling right now for those of you that aren't watching, and she's ready to do battle, and I think I'm going to lose. I'm scared too. No, because I think I'm just of the mind that I don't think the world is a worse place than what it has been. I think we're just aware of extreme examples, which causes alarm within us. And I think that's what the internet does. I think that's what anything does. It creates a false alarm sense in us that doesn't give us an accurate representation of reality. And so the 2 points I always lead with is, one, child abductions are down right now comparative to where they were. And a part of that, and I know you've got a great rebuttal to that. And so the child abductions piece is down from where it was. 2, homicide rate is down to where it is. And so one of the more alarming things that I'm concerned about, especially relative to youth homicides or youth death rate, we'll put it, is in 2014 was the first year that suicides outnumbered homicides among individuals below the age of 17. So it's isolation that is becoming more of a difficulty than it is individuals that youth are killing one another. It's more youth are killing themselves, which it seems that this isolationist perspective is just very harmful. And so when I think about it, is the world a more dangerous place than what it was? We'll say 30 years ago. We'll use the arbitrary number 30. It just doesn't seem to me as though the world is more dangerous. I think the world is still a dangerous place. There's definitely a significant role for a parent, especially from the biblical perspective, to be the warrior that has the arrow in the quiver and to shoot the child towards the glory of God that would be for the good of the world and the joy of their soul. But I'm just of the mind that the world isn't a more difficult place. Thoughts?
I'm reading some statistics.
Oh, really?
Yes, no, but I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, the first is I don't think it's fair to say that it's just in the news more. So that's the only reason people are being more careful, because the instances are true.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So factually speaking, it's still occurring.
Yep.
And now we're just maybe more aware of it. But then the question really is, do you have a duty or an obligation once you're made more aware of what's going on in the world around you to then act to protect your child? And then to what extent? So I don't know that the right question is it less or more? The fact is it's occurring. And when we have, what is the statistic? 1 in 6 women have been assaulted sexually in their lifetime. I mean, that's an astounding statistic. And so it's not that this is some fake fear-mongering issue that's out there. These are real occurrences of abuse in children. And I think that we can't just pretend it doesn't exist. Now, the question is, to what extent do you protect your child, allow them to play? Those are the questions that you have to ask if you're going to be a wise parent.
Yeah. Keisha, thoughts?
Well, I think I agree with Chelsey that you definitely want to be wise about what you're doing, but I'll continue as soon as we get back.
Okay, so we have to take a break. I'm sorry, I lost track of time.
That's okay.
We'll be back right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, here for the third hour. Thank you so much for joining us at this Millennial Roundtable. I'm joined by Chelsey Youman and Keisha Russell of the First Liberty Institute. And here I am, the lone male, but also the lone individual that's up against two lawyers from the First Liberty Institute. So count me grateful, but also count me grateful that you all are tuning in right now. We've been talking about kind of parenting, surprisingly. Really spun off on this conversation that we've been having off and on for the past 2 hours relative to the bribery case that has made its way into the headlines today, where individuals such as Felicity Huffman of Desperate Housewives fame and Lori Loughlin of Full House fame are making the news due to their efforts. They joined upwards of 48 other people that bribed officials in order to get their children or kids into schools, everywhere from the Ivies to USC. Lori Loughlin of Full House fame spent upwards of $500,000 to make sure that both of her kids got into school. And that's really started a conversation relative to this new parenting paradigm that we find ourselves in, whether it's transitioning away from a helicopter parenting and moving towards a type of lawnmower parenting. And the question that we've been going back and forth on, which I think I've actually won this argument, no, just kidding, is this idea of, is the world a worse place today than it was, we'll say, 30 to 50 years ago? And maybe probably a more different way to be able to say that is just trying to understand why parenting has changed to a different paradigm. And so we have been talking and taking some of your phone calls. We'll continue taking some of your phone calls, but know this, here after a little bit, we're going to transition, because what I want to talk about, especially among millennials and Generation Z, is what's happening on the college campus right now, where there was a new study that was put out that indicated that Republican students feel upwards of 40% of them feel unsafe on the college campus. And is this lack of safety, this feeling of safety, is it merited? And so we'll kind of discuss that for a little bit as well. But we'll continue taking your phone calls. And so you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. For those of you that are trying to log on to Facebook right now, one, if you're at work, stop. You're not supposed to be on Facebook at work. But two, you're having difficulty getting on Facebook because Facebook is down right now in a shocking twist. And they had to tell it over Twitter, of all places. Isn't that crazy? So the social media ecosystem.
The entire Facebook is down?
Look at do you not know
I wonder
this?
if it's karma for all of their...
Yeah. I feel like a collective sigh of relief is lifting the countenance of every American right now. It's working on
my app, though.
Is it working on your app? Okay, you and Mark Zuckerberg you've leaned in with Sheryl Sandberg, and now
they're listening right now, so as soon as they hear me dogging on Facebook, it's about to shut down.
Yeah, so, but nevertheless, so you can't watch on Facebook right now. You can watch on YouTube, and you can also listen in, obviously, through one of your local stations, what some of you are doing right now. But you can call in. We're taking some of your phone calls relative to parenting in today's age. Is it tougher to be a parent today than it was 50 years ago? Is the world a worse place today than it was 50 years ago? 800-351-1212. Let's go to Laura in Pennsylvania right now. Laura, are you there?
I am here. How you doing? Thanks for taking my call.
Hey, thank you so much for calling in. What's your point of view, Laura?
My point of view is that the world isn't a worse or a better place, but it's just become a bigger place. And so the stakes are higher. The competition is more serious. We're no longer competing with Jenny and Johnny down the road. We're competing with Asia. We're competing with India. And so as we want to push our kids, we want to show them that, the bar has been raised. And so now just mathematically, they're competing with more students.
I completely agree with that. One of the fascinating things, so doing some work in higher education, I was fascinated that we're starting to see, especially with this immigration conversation that we're having right now here in the U.S. Well, one of the things that's happened is that there's actually been a decrease in the number of international students that are making their way to American universities right now. There was a decrease of 7% this past year. Number is around 271,000 international college students. But one of the things that we found is something that you've hit at, Laura, is that you're completely correct in that we're living in a very globalized society today where individuals are not only competing with individuals not within the U.S., but also around the world simply because of the telecommuting aspect to working now, to where I don't have to have someone that's being in the cubicle right beside me. We can contract out with somebody that's halfway across the world that can do that work just as well as they can.
Right, exactly. And even technology. I mean, the new careers. I was born 1979, and so I was a latchkey kid, and we went home alone. And, the careers that we looked at were doctor, lawyer, and that was the top of our field. But technology has really changed that, where there's more to learn, there's more to know, and the world is moving at a faster pace. So we have to make sure that our kids understand that. Otherwise, we're giving them kind of a smaller town mindset.
Completely agree. Well, Laura, thank you so much for calling in. Appreciate it. Let's jump on down to Georgia right now. Donna in Georgia, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Donna, what's your point of view?
Okay, my point of view is I do believe things have gotten worse. In the past, there's always been the murder, the homosexuality, the killing of the baby. But now, as the lady was just talking about, it's more widespread. And now it's actually accepted as a right. It's not just something that you'll occasionally hear. It's being fought for in the courts. And then in the past, you wouldn't have heard a time that somebody didn't know if they were male or female. And yet this is what they're wanting to get to our children and start teaching them these things at 5 years old when they should not even be thinking about that. But now they're trying to get to these little minds and warp them before they even have a chance to get all their family values in place. And then they want to say that, like, the Bible it's not true and that you don't listen to the parents. And so they're taking away the authority that God gives the parents to raise these children. Yeah. And so I believe it has got worse.
Yeah, I think that's one of the you do bring up some really good points and some data points. I think that is, there used to be a day that there was a tomboy or a tomgirl, and now that those days are kind of gone to a large degree. Like you said, that they're trying to wrestle temptations of what the new temptations are there. But I'd also say some of the older temptations are there, or aren't there anymore either. Like you think about smoking, for example. Brad, I won't throw Brad underneath the bus, which there's very little chance that Brad is listening right now, but who knows? He could be listening. So Brad was the first one that introduced me to smoking. And I remember it was right behind his house that he did this, which I thought was a pretty bold move, seeing as how his mom was in the kitchen. But Brad gave me a cigarette. And I can't think today, the numbers are very clear. There's more kids that smoke weed than smoke cigarettes today. And right. I think that there's even though there are new temptations, some of those older temptations aren't there as well.
That's right. Well, the thing is things, sin's always been in the world. But the thing is you would like to see at least people that's in power trying to fight to keep this nation upright morally, instead of seeing so much of it going downhill and
yes,
seeing
ma'am.
Our
well, we've got to take
fighting.
a break, Donna. Thank you so much for your phone call, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
For the last few decades, we've been scolded by everyone from radical environmentalists to simple back-to-the-nature advocates that we have overly industrialized society. It must be dismantled. We need to adopt the ways of the past. I thought about this when reading a commentary by Jeffrey Tucker. He was watching a video by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was trying to explain why the Earth is headed for an ecological disaster and why we probably shouldn't be having any more children. But he says he was distracted because she was saying all this while carefully cutting sweet potatoes before putting them in the oven. She put salt and pepper on them. Tucker reminds us that salt was so rare during most of human history that it was often regarded as money. Then we figured out how to produce and distribute salt to every table of the world. She was cutting the sweet potatoes with a steel knife. It took generations of metallurgists to figure out how to make steel reliably and affordably. Before steel, there were bodies of water you could not cross without a boat because no one knew how to make an iron bridge that wouldn't sink. She put the sweet potatoes in an oven, but Tucker reminds us that she didn't have to chop down trees and build a fire like 99.99% of humanity had to until relatively recently. And where did she get those sweet potatoes? No one grows them in Washington, D.C. Where did the store get them? Until fairly recently, the sweet potato was trapped in distant places. Now they're flown on planes and shipped in ocean liners and brought to the store by trucks. All of those modes of transportation use fossil fuels. His point is something I've noticed. Many Americans, including members of Congress, enjoy the fruits of technology and capitalism, but at the same time want to eliminate the technological developments and free market benefits that provided them. It is short-sighted at best. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Keisha Russell and Chelsey Youman. We have been talking about parenting. Is it more difficult to be a parent today than it was 50 years ago? We're talking about the world in particular. And so is the world a worse place it was to raise a kid today than it was 50 years ago? We've been taking some of your phone calls, and you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. For those of you that are trying to log on to Facebook right now, we are having some technical difficulty. I think most of Facebook is having technical difficulty from what we understand, but we do have, for some strange reason, God works in mysterious ways. There was someone that was able to communicate to us, specifically a man named Bobby. And Bobby, I would assume he's a male, even though I do know some female Bobbies, but we'll go ahead and say this is a male Bobby, has come from on high, and he says, and he has declared authoritatively that pork barbecue is the real barbecue. And I'm gleeful right now as I get 2 stare downs, but it just feels
like
so
in
good.
the wrong state for this. You're in the wrong state.
I just feel so good about it. It just feels so right. So nevertheless, we're going to continue taking some of your phone calls. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Let's jump over. We've got Brady right now. Our phone system is not working right now. So we've got Brady on line 3. Are you there, Brady?
Hello.
Hey, Brady, what's your point of view?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, good afternoon, folks. It's a pleasure to speak with you. Yeah, my point of view on this, and it's not just my view, but it's my understanding, that we live in a world that's greatly accelerated in its moral decline. And this is mainly due to the fact that we live in the last days. As the last days come forward and get closer and closer to its time and its climax, the principle of opposition is going to be very relevant, and evil is going to gain in greater intensity and in power and in strength. Now, God's power does as well, but in a lot lesser numbers. What I'm seeing is, 50 years ago, we as people that were Christian families trying to maintain a course of integrity, truth, and honesty and uprightness, we were able to do so at a lot better rate because we held to that old paradigm that was more from right and wrong, black and white. And now that 50 years has gone by, and we're living really close to the pendulum swinging back, we see Satan raging greater in the hearts and minds of men we've ever had in the history of the world. We've never seen a greater intensity of homosexuality, bestiality, and pedophilia, and the killing of babies has occurred in this great nation. And there's a large range of different levels of this happening amongst the ranks of people. Obviously, this what I've described as the worst of the worst, but all of us as Christian people are subject to the compromise and concession through secular humanism that's infiltrated all ranks of our society, socially, politically, economically, and religiously. And particularly at the pulpit, we've been infiltrated by the purpose-driven church. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, of course, but the main flux of men, including all of Christianity, in essence, worships a God which we do not know anymore.
Yeah, I think
left to know where we wrong, and we make distinctions. Christ did not come here to bring peace. He came here to bring a sword to divide the wicked from the righteous.
Yeah, it is very interesting. There is quite a divide that we find ourselves in. You know, one of the things that I'm it's just a reminder, just because to a certain degree, we hear it in Peter telling us in 1 Peter 4:12 not to be surprised by the fiery ordeal. Even Jesus is going to mention this. Don't be surprised when the world hates you, for I've overcome the world, right? You will encounter difficulty. There's a sense that we've always known following after Jesus is going to require a little bit of difficulty. But I think one of the beautiful things that we can understand is that though there is difficulty, we can take heart, and there's going to be difficulty in this world. We can take heart because we follow after the one that has overcome this world, which kind of leads me to my second point that I want to kind of shift towards and pivot towards, and that's the idea that we're living in a time in which it seems as though many feel unsafe on the college campus. And so we're going to make our way to the second article that is on the website, pointofview.net right now. And it says that less than half of Republican college students feel safe sharing their beliefs on campus. And so according to a new survey, 38% of Republican students said they sometimes feel unsafe on campus because of their political views, while less than half said they feel welcome at their school. Republicans are 3 times more likely than Democrats to feel unsafe on campus for holding their political views. And now, obviously, this is coming on the tail of a news that was out last week where a video went viral that revealed some man brutalizing is probably too hard a word, punching him and knocking out this conservative activist on campus right now. And so, Chelsey, initial reaction right now when you hear about conservatives, when you hear about Republican students feeling unsafe, is this an instance where you just think, they're just snowflakes that need to tough it up, or is this kind of legitimate right now?
Well, actually, my first thought was neither of those. My first thought was, thank the good Lord for Texas A&M University, my alma mater. I am an Aggie, and conservatives of all shapes and sizes are welcome to join Texas A&M University.
Do my parents have to bribe to get me in there? Probably
they
with
might
my
actually.
grades.
No, I am an Aggie, and I'm really proud of that because A&M, although of course, the professor, the staff of professors, they're going to be very liberal, and there are, a lot of Democrats on campus. Really, conservatism, it really thrived there. The Republican Club was incredible. I was a member. It was really fun. It was during the Obama, I'm dating myself, but during the Obama campaign in 2008, I was able to just join other Republican primary campaigns. And There's a lot of political activity, but going back now, I don't know if I could say the same thing. And I know that we even have interns coming from across the country and interning with us at First Liberty Institute who have had horrible experiences as conservatives. So I think there is an issue. I had one of our interns tell me that the professor had said, if you are pro-life or pro-traditional marriage, male and female marriage, stand up. And only 3 were brave enough to stand up in the entire class. And she spent 30 minutes ridiculing them publicly. This is a law professor. I mean, she has the ability to really, really tank your career and references. And so it is my understanding that just from especially students who are there now, that it's become a very, very really unwelcome place to anyone whose views are different. They hide their views. They just don't talk about them. Say, I have friends and we don't agree on politics, but they don't really know how I feel, is really the tenor that I'm hearing. And I completely understand because one of the things the article spoke about was their primary fear is being labeled. I think that the other side has done really disservice to debate and interaction, and both philosophical, political, ideological debate is at a dead end when you just start name calling and you brand someone a brand that isn't true or isn't fair. That's not a real place for ideas to thrive, which is what campuses should really be about.
Okay. Your thoughts, Keisha?
I mean, I definitely think that there's a lot of truth to that sentiment. I think, although I didn't, experience any direct hostility in, my education, I think I definitely saw that there was a huge shift in sort of the ideology of the students that were around me, and the fact that a lot of people believed a lot of things that I didn't agree with as a Christian or didn't, feel were even in some cases made practical sense, in my opinion, So, I was, willing to talk about how I felt, but I know a lot of people who were not willing to talk about how they felt because they were intimidated by the sheer number of people that didn't agree with them. But because I'm a Christian, I expect to be sort of outnumbered in terms of ideology. But I think, college campus is a really important place because that's where people learn to deal with the fact that everybody's not going to agree with you. Yeah. And I think that we've gotten to the place where we've allowed people to make it seem as if you don't have to hear anything that is not your viewpoint. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's it. And we're going to have to go to a break here shortly. And we'd love to hear from you on this 800-351-1212. But I do, because you hear it mostly comes from the right, this idea that the left, the political left, is snowflakes, individuals that individuals that are easily offended and are in need of safe places. But is this an instance whereby certain individuals are the ones that usually call individuals snowflakes, are they themselves reacting in such a way that they might be snowflakes? So we're going to take some of your phone calls on that, so you can call in. What's your perception of that? 800-351-1212. And then we will take some of your phone calls, talk a little bit more about it right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, that's about to be pummeled in this argument. But I'm looking forward to it.
Look,
I'm willing to go toe-to-toe.
Nick hit a nerve on the break.
I know.
I'm irritated because I'm coming in hot, Nick.
I know she is, and that's why I'm trying to
And I think
cool
our
her
listeners
jets
will appreciate it.
And so I'm trying to cool her jets to hopefully try to reframe my arguments and hopefully have a surviving chance
we'll let
for
you
this.
start. We'll let you
just
start.
for the sake of conversation. So, listeners, we are talking about a poll that was just put out that indicates that less than half of college Republican students feel safe sharing their beliefs on college campus. And so this is where we're headed right now. And so I don't even know how to articulate my argument right now. I don't even know a good vantage point to start, because we're living in a world that is so increasingly partisan right now. There was new research that was even just put out, and this might be me trying to shift the argument a little bit.
Okay, go for it. We'll see.
New research that was just put out of Harvard, and then I think a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and they coined a term, and the term is called political or motive attribution symmetry. And motive attribution symmetry indicates that your ideology is based in love, your opponent's ideology is based in hate. And so it's a political science survey, and what they found is that individuals that are Democrats think that their ideology is based in love and their opponent's ideology is based in hate. And in turn, Republicans think that their ideology is based in love, a Democrat's ideology is based in hate. One of the findings that they indicated when they looked at some of the data points indicates that the level of intensity and animosity that each side has for one another is at a level comparable to the Israeli and Palestinian relationship right now. We are at such a level right now.
How did they bring that comparison?
Yeah, no, but I mean, and this isn't some crazy article. Like this, American Enterprise Institute is utilizing some of this work.
Well, I'm
and
just
so,
curious what the questions were. How do you make that comparison?
you're
Because
just
they're shooting at each other.
Yeah,
so,
there's
a peace treaty.
Look at you've got an individual that was a Bernie Sanders supporter that's shooting at our congressional
There's
officials.
nothing compared to the Israeli and Palestinian.
So I'm just saying
a
it's at a
no-fly
level.
zone.
It's at a comparable level, and so I would argue. My point is that we're at such a highly partisan level right now that it's untenable, and two, especially from a conservative standpoint. So I'll show my cards and show my conservatism. Is the fact that from a conservative standpoint, I recognize that politics has a place, but it's not the primary place, that there's more important things than political matters. That doesn't mean that I give into the false dichotomy that says that I either have to be completely in or completely out, but I understand that it's a part of it. There's more important things than politics, i.e. religion, i.e. my family, i.e. my local community. I'm wanting to join these associations, these little platoons that Edmund Burke talks about. But increasingly, we find ourselves in a situation in which there's just this invective to the extent that we're having these articles that are being featured of surveys that Republican college students don't feel safe giving voice. And I just think that that's a sad indictment on where we are as a society.
I actually agree with everything you just said, which is different than what you said on the break. So thank you. I guess I won you over. No, I agree. It is sad. I agree. It is polarized. I don't know. I can't say. I think politics has always been polarizing. I think it's always been ugly. There's always been just passion. It's the beauty of living in a democracy.
Yeah.
I love that there are diverse ideologies, diverse ideas. I think there are true ways, there are better ways, there are more economical ways to get things done. Of course, I have my own opinions, but at the end of the day, people are allowed in our free society to have their factions and their allegiances to institutions outside of the church, obviously, which is our first loyalty. With that said, what was said on the break, Nick mentioned that he thinks that maybe conservative students are being too sensitive.
Yeah.
Which
I'll go with that.
I think frustrated me because, maybe I have selection bias because all day, every day, I represent clients who literally receive death threats, have had to move. We've had to hire security teams sometimes to travel to hearings. That's not a lie. So I have seen so much animosity. I got off Twitter. Not just because of the threats. It's not that I couldn't handle it. It's just, it's not fun when someone says, congratulations, you have a career in bigotry.
Yeah.
I don't need to read that toxic statements against me. These people don't know me. And I think that on college campuses, we're seeing more and more of that than ever. Just this, there are labels. If you are a conservative, they have a label for that. I won't even say it out loud because I don't like repeating them. And if you say you're Republican, there's another label for that. I can think of 2 words on CNN every single day used to describe Republicans and conservatives. And when I flip to Fox News, which is arguably the conservative side, we don't do that to the left, because I think a lot of times conservatives are focused on the issues and debating maybe facts and evidence. And this is obviously selection bias, but we want to engage in the ideological discussion. We want to talk about theories and the issues underlying. And I don't see conservatives at the same rate using labels to just shut down an argument before we get there to the left, the way the left does to conservatives.
Would you add?
Well, I would add that I think that is really apparent on college campuses.
Yeah.
And as I said before, in my experience, really seeing that if you are a Christian or if you are conservative and you have certain views, that you are going to be, in a situation where a lot of people don't agree with you. And if you can't handle that, that's going to be a problem. And even beyond that, even beyond not wanting sort of to teach, younger liberals to have honest discourse and to talk about facts and figures and statistics, as opposed to saying, well, you're a bigot because you believe blah, blah, blah. Or you're this because you believe blah, 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 as opposed to saying, well, this is why I believe blah, blah, blah. Why do you believe blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's happening.
So to a certain degree, I agree with you all. Like, I think that there's a place for logic. I think that there's a place for reason. And just to let our listeners know, I am a conservative. Like, I am a Republican. I'm just trying to make an argument right now, just because, and for our listeners that don't know, all my family are Democrats. Like, I come from a family of Democrats, and some of my best friends in the entire world are Democrats. And so whenever there's one person in particular I'm thinking about right now, when she said on air on national TV that Obama is not a good man because he supports abortion, I thought that was and she has a national platform. And so when she said that, I thought that was a pretty radical. I thought that was a pretty radical statement that I had never heard about before. That the litmus test for an individual to be a good man would be as to whether he supports abortion or not, or supports a woman's choice to have abortion, which I think is a legitimate question to pose, right? If you are an individual that is pro-choice, that supports a woman's right, and again, I am pro-life to the very core. Like, my money goes there. That's where my time goes with boards that I serve on. But to call a man evil, to call a man not good simply because of a political position relative to abortions, having a woman's right to choose, that's a pretty strong statement. Am I wrong to think that?
Look, the point I like to make on this is that when I, as a conservative, talk about abortion and pro-life issues, I deal with it with the reality that it is.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about what the reality is. It is killing the unborn.
It is killing the unborn.
And I think that the left does a really good job with their smoke and mirrors and talking about it being pro-life is pro-woman. Let's put that out there.
Yeah,
the studies have shown coming around woman, enabling her, telling her she is powerful enough to be a single mom. She's enabled to do this. Having a community and a church come around here and help her make that decision and support her is far more loving than the smoke and mirrors that the other side does, where they treat her like a 50s housewife and she walks into a clinic. They don't let her see her baby. They don't let her see a sonogram. They don't worry about it, sweetheart. They tap her on the head. They don't give her any medical information. And I think that is a debate we need to be able to have. And when you just label someone anti-woman, you shut down the debate to talk about it on its terms. And we have to deal with abortion on its terms. And so I think, to me, what you're saying is, if we're dealing with abortion on its terms, it is evil. It is an evil. And so to call it an evil, I don't know, is unloving. I see what you're saying. You're using it as an example to say that the right uses labels too, and I know they do. Both sides are guilty of that. My point being that we need to deal with the issues on their terms, and we need to talk about the issues from the reality, like what is truth, and not worried about ostracizing each other and labeling each other. And I think that's what this article speaks to that you were talking about, is that liberals on campus feel, in the article, statistically more free to share their views than conservatives. And that's just going to be the way, that's a fact.
Yeah. And I think that's just a part of being a part of a community where you have similar views. Like, I am much more prone to share about my Christian beliefs with fellow Christians. Like, I'm much more prone to talk about to talk about Tennessee barbecue with individuals that are enjoying. Like, I think that's just part of, and the research is very clear on this, that there's more liberals that are on campus. There's a higher constituency among liberals, higher affinity of liberals that are in the professorship, higher affinity of liberals that are in administration. I think that's a whole other issue. I'm really interested to hear from you all, because we've touched a nerve a little bit. There's people that are calling in.
Oh, yeah. That's what all of this was just a race to get everyone.
But I do want to continue talking about this, and who knows, we'll accept phone calls, 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. We've got to take a break right now, because I do want to get back to this. Personally, I just think that we've become so highly partisan that we need to be able to not even just cut through, not just get rid of the smoke and mirrors, not just cut through the labels. We need to see one another as vital members. We're not enemies, as Lincoln said, to appeal to our better angels. But we got to take a break. We'll be back after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Aiken, Illinois is a small town in the heartland of our country. There you will find the salt-of-the-earth folks growing the crops that feed the rest of us. Everyone knows everyone, so it was no surprise when the Clark's boy, Seth, was announced the salutatorian of his graduating grade school class. But when word got around that Seth was going to quote from the Bible in his speech, someone complained. That complaint reached the school board, and soon enough, Seth was told that the Constitution would not let his speech with religious content be delivered on school grounds to a captive graduation ceremony audience. Well, that was that, or so it seemed. The story has a bit of a surprise ending. A neighbor who lived across from the school offered up his front porch. So when it came time for Seth's speech, the audience turned around. There on the front porch of this iconic Midwestern town was Seth Clark, holding forth, giving the speech that he always wanted to give. Perhaps you live in one of those towns where folks still stop to chat on the front stoop on a cool summer's evening. If not, you need to know that the Constitution never requires a student's private remarks be given on private property. It was the proudest moment of my life, said Seth's mom. Well, I suppose it was. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. We have been arguing a little bit while we've been on break. Unfortunately, you had to listen to Jeremy. No, I'm just kidding. Jeremy Dice. I'm just kidding. I love Jeremy. But we have been talking. Like, I'm really interested in this, and I've been challenged in my thinking because Arthur Brooks has done helped me leaps and bounds with my thinking. He actually is going to be on Dallas Baptist University campus here shortly to talk about his new book, Love Your Neighbors. And again, he's a strong Roman Catholic. He's led the American Enterprise Institute, and he is just this idea of seeing the other person on the other side and not seeing them as a list of beliefs, but really seeing them as a soul that Jesus has died for, that you might have disagreements with, but you don't necessarily have to demonize. And so I've been thinking more and more about this. How do I advocate? So, for example, in this position, in my position, I'm conservative. Like I participated in National Review. I give my money to human trafficking causes, to pro-life causes. I give my time to I'm trying to think of some other things, to business leaders to be able to pray. Like there's a litany of positions, not only of my resources, but my time and where my talents are going, that are moving towards a particular conservative end, or where conservative ideals are being satisfied. But I also know that I come from a family of Democrats. I completely understand. I've got some of my best friends are Democrats, and I'm just trying to wrap my mind around trying to understand the other side, and how certain individuals feel unsafe to be able to give voice to their opinions, to go back to our survey that we were talking about, and two, this idea of advocating for violence, which I think is probably feeling unsafe is one part of this survey, but also we know that 20% of college students, not Democrat or Republican, just 20% of college students think that violence is justified to be able to shut down hate speech, which I think is alarming. It's just alarming, and it's an affront to the American ideal, right? It's like our American ideal. There's a reason why we protected the God-given right to speech, is because we believe certain issues are worth debating over. And the idea that someone could just be a caveman or cavewoman and shut down that speech with violence, I think is an affront to the American ideal.
Absolutely, it is. I think that that's what college campuses are for. That's what education is for. Part of the purpose is to teach students and kids to voice their opinions and voice them respectfully and engage in discourse, even if you don't, even if you passionately disagree with someone, being able to talk about it and not label and name call and, result in a conversation that really isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think some of the college campuses, based on some of the things that even the short time I've been working at First Liberty, some of the things that, I've seen come out of college campuses because people haven't really learned to have conversations in a way that's going to be productive.
Yeah. And I think, Chelsey, one of the things that I think is really lacking in our discourse today is that we just don't know the other side. And I think that's the reason why we're starting to see this rise of individuals feeling unsafe, one, or two, this violence, too. Like, it's really hard for me to demonize the other side. And again, I haven't been exposed to a lot of people threatening my life. There was a guy once that said he'd put a muzzle on my mouth because he didn't agree with what I was saying, but I take boxing classes, and no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm a wimp. But I just don't think they know the other side. And I just hate how divisive it's become right now. And this is not me trying to advocate for let's all just hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but I'm also not stupid. When I look back in history, I know that there was a time that you had Tip O'Neill hanging out with Ronald Reagan. I know there was a time where there was a level of, we have these vehement disagreements and differences relative to political beliefs, but it's not to the extent that we're going to enact violence on one another, to silence one another.
Right. Scalia and Ginsburg.
Yeah. And so I just don't, I don't know how to move forward from here, maybe is the question. Two, I don't know what contributed to this. And three, I don't know what we can do about it, where we find ourselves in right now, because this is very applicable to where we're at, and specifically to the conversation centered around the Millennial Roundtable right now.
Right. Well, I think it's important to continue to engage in dialogue with people with different viewpoints, knowingly or unknowingly. Yeah. I mean, there's no harm in having the discussion. And there have been so many people, I think especially in our line of work at First Liberty, where we really are representing people who've been fired for their faith, or for praying on a football field, or just these incredible scenarios that a lot of people, it's hard to believe that that's the America we live in right now. But being able to just have that discussion about this, our clients are just trying to be faithful in the best ways they know how. And you might not agree with them or where their conscience drew the line, but we can still have a principled discussion about that. And I think continuing to engage in that discussion is just so important for the continuation of our ideologies. I think that the country kind of gave an answer on this. So if we really think just not too far back, but during the Obama presidency, a lot of this labeling and calling the right names, the left engaged in a really orchestrated media campaign, and the right got tired of it, and Trump won. I mean, people were tired of our politically correct, everyone's offended by everything, everyone's shutting each other down. People voted, and they voted for the least politically correct person that has ever run for the presidency. And I think that was a resounding answer to what America wants. They want openness. They want dialogue. Of course, we would love to see a unified country again. Of course, we would love to see just all of this heightened, the violence that is happening at, at the protests decreasing. I do think those are anomalies. I think those are outliers. I'm not going to put that against the whole, but I wish conservatives still felt able to have these conversations on college campuses. And that's kind of where my viewpoint on it.
I think one of the things that I think would be a very helpful thing that for our listeners to do, and even that I myself find myself doing, it's one, disengaging from finding a rhythm. And so it's not, I think the false goal would be just forget your convictions, sing Kumbaya, come to some consensus. I don't think that's it, because then you're not fighting for what you believe in, and that's doing something to your human spirit that I don't think is good and healthy. What Brooks argues in his new book, Love Your Neighbor, is we don't need to stop disagreeing with each other. We need just better disagreements. Like we need to be able to try to figure out, like, first principles. Where are you coming from with this? So one of the things that I was talking with one of my friends about, we were talking about what he termed, according to Crooked Media, which is on the left. He said that President Trump's budget proposal was a Medicaid for none plan because it cut upwards of $800 million from the Medicare budget. And what I said is, well, there's one way to look at it, which is President Trump is cutting a lot of that, and he doesn't care for people that need that medical support. Or a conservative perspective would just say, well, no, he cares for those people. He just thinks there's a better way for them to receive care other than by the government. Mm-hmm. And so it's recognizing, one, I think we have a shared commonality of we both really care for people and we want people to get health care. Two, we just have a different way in which individuals can get that health care. And I think it's inserting a little bit more grace into some of these conversations, I think would be very helpful, but also not giving in to the kind of the ploy that I've got to lose my convictions and I've got to just get my guitar out and sing.
Right. Well, I want to make a distinction here. Just for me as a conservative and a Christian, I mean, my real conviction and principle comes from my faith. Yeah. And so I'm not offended when someone disagrees with me because that has nothing, it's my political affiliation, but it's not my identity. My identity is Christ. Yeah. So I'm a little more offended if someone comes against me for being a Christian. Yeah. And I think there's a difference there that we, should just be noted. Yeah, that's a great word. And so we are out of time for this Wednesday's Millennial Roundtable. Keisha, so grateful that you have decided to join us today. Hopefully you will come back and put up with me. And Chelsey, as always, so good to see you as well. And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. Kirby Anderson will be back behind the mic. We'll see you then.
From Thinking Man Films and Fathom Events comes Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. A new documentary follows investigative filmmaker Timothy Mahoney's faith-affirming journey throughout the Middle East in search of scientific evidence that Moses wrote the first books of the Bible.
The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book.
Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. In theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only. More information is available at patternsofevidence.com/Moses.
Is there a lot of free time in your schedule? Probably not. Most of us are on the go all the time, and Point of View is ready to go with you no matter where on the go is. Visit the App Store for your phone or tablet and search for Point of View Radio. Our app lets you listen or watch anytime it's convenient for you. And since we're told to be doers, not just listeners, the app provides a quick way to take action on the issues we're talking about. You can send us a question, find a local radio station, read articles, listen and share Kirby's viewpoints, commentaries. It's a lot of impact in one little free app. Visit the App Store today, right now, and download the Point of View Radio app. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.